Good morning. It is Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. First up this morning, breaking news yesterday, the subway shooter Frank James is in custody. He's due in court this morning on multiple charges of attempted murder and other charges. The gentleman seen in the picture it was a grocery store clerk who actually caught Frank James. And so New York City police have him in custody. He's scheduled to be in court today. A lot of psychological issues. We talked about it on the show yesterday. We will continue to follow that. But Frank James is in custody in New York City for the wild shooting that injured at least 12 people. Actually 2 days ago. And so we will continue to follow that. And this morning, I'm going to borrow heavily from journalist and Rutgers School of Communications instructor David A. Love, who noted that the right to protest in America is under attack, and it all involves a case against a Black Lives Matter activist. Conservative Republican judges are coming for your right to protest and making up laws to punish racial justice movements, and you should be concerned about this. Love specifically cites a lawsuit that a Baton Rouge police officer filed against D. Ray McKeeson for a 2016 protest that D. Ray organized against the police killing of Alton Sterling. An unknown perpetrator threw a piece of concrete at the officer, who is identified as Officer John Doe in court filings, striking him in the face and causing, quote, injuries to his teeth, jaw, brain, and head. Doe is seeking damages. In 2017, Judge Brian Jackson, a federal judge appointed by President Obama, ruled that McKeeson's solely engaged in protected speech under the First Amendment and, as a peaceful protester, could not be held responsible for the actions of a violent demonstrator. However, when the case was appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, 3 out of the 5 judges reviewing the case, a Republican majority, ruled that McKeeson was potentially liable for the anonymous perpetrator's attack on Officer Doe. The problem is that the Supreme Court had already decided years earlier in NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware Company that civil liability may not be imposed merely because an individual belonged to a group, some members of which committed acts of violence. In other words, someone such as McKeeson can't be held responsible for the violent actions of an unknown person attending the protest. Well, months later, one of the 3 Republican judges who had ruled against the activist, Judge Don Willett, who is a Trump appointee, backtracked. In a stunning dissent, he repudiated his own vote against McKeeson. That, however, did not change the court's decision against D. Ray. The U.S. Supreme Court took the case and then sent it back down to the lower federal courts to determine if the laws of the state of Louisiana through the Louisiana Supreme Court would allow Officer Doe to sue D. Ray McKeeson. This brings us to the most recent March ruling by the Louisiana Supreme Court, which said the officer can sue D. Ray McKeeson under Louisiana law. Lawsuits such as this, favored by Republican politicians, judges, and police officers, are meant to have a chilling effect on free speech. The right to protest is one of the 5 fundamental freedoms enshrined in the First Amendment. But during her confirmation hearings, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she, of all people, could not remember that the right to protest was part of the First Amendment. That lack of knowledge or memory lapse does not bode well for the highest court and what the Constitution calls the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Well, we discussed all of that and the state of Black America, at least according to the National Urban League, with Sam Collins of the Washington Informer. Good morning, Sam.
Morning. Hope all is well.
Absolutely. So, Sam, this D. Ray McKeeson lawsuit, your thoughts on this? We know what the Supreme Court had previously said. Now we have Judge Amy Coney Barrett saying, basically not knowing that this was part of somebody's rights or our rights to demonstrate that was part of free speech.
I think the events that taken place really speak to how conservative judges in particular, they often harp on this language about intent, the original intent of the language. And at the very same time, they put their interpretation of the law into the mix. And it shows us that law and politics are never separate, because this is a political agenda to really stop uh, a fervor for change. And it's a warning shot to other protesters, because once you take to the streets and you protest against injustice, um, paradigms are threatened to change, and we've seen them try to stunt that by corporatizing justice. And this is just another step to make sure that people no longer feel the urge to take to the streets against injustice. And one more point I want to make is that oftentimes, Black Lives Matter, the movement and the organization and the people who are involved, either directly or indirectly, they all get conflated and put into the mix. So, as Black people in this country, we are never offered or provided the privilege of being individuals. Whatever one person does always, falls on all of us. And whether you care about that or not is a personal decision. It doesn't take away from that reality. And that is exactly what we see with this case.
Yeah, holding a peaceful protest, and someone decides, and we've seen a lot of that too, right, Sam? Since the George Floyd incident, peaceful protests being interrupted by outsiders, not necessarily the demonstrators themselves, the protesters themselves, the peaceful protesters. We've seen a lot of that, and we've also uncovered a number of times that they had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter.
Exactly. I know one case in particular in Virginia where that happened. And you have people who, whether they are of our complexion or not, who take matters into their own hands and vandalize property just because they feel that energy. And Black Lives Matter protesters, or protesters peacefully um, going against injustice, they often catch the flack for that. And it's very paralyzing, and it's a psychological game, because here the state is, through their laws, gunning down Black men, women, and children, and invoking violence. And at the very same time, we're expected to uphold standards of civility in a place that's not even civil. And the very people who are vandalizing places, they get off the hook as well, because it's all about Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and uh,
Well, go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
no, it's no problem. One more thing I want to say is that, in regards to the case, is that people already, feel the need that when somebody does something wrong or outside of the box of what is considered civil, that they want to talk about, they want to negate uh, the whole complaint that people have in the first place. Well, if you guys hadn't been doing this, then they wouldn't gun us down in the streets. If you guys would just be more civil, then maybe we can get things done quicker. And that speaks to just how, once again, in this country, it's a psychological game that is meant to paralyze us into inaction. In every corner, we don't know what to do or what to act, because we feel the need to uphold their system of civility, which is just a chess game, a game that changes at their very whim.
Yeah, I'm going to say two things too here. One, hopefully, in the case of D-Ray McKeeson, um, we've been seeing the reports. We heard Patrice Cullors the other day talk about explaining why Black Lives Matter Foundation bought a $6.5 million home in Studio City, California. And let's just hope that they are using funds to back D-Ray in this case. Just have to put it where it's at. I'm not criticizing Black Lives Matter for the home or the other purchases that Patrice and others have allegedly made. I'm just stating that they got a $66.5 million donation last year. Let's use some of that to help D-Ray in this legal battle. Also, I want to highlight something, Sam. Angela Connolly, she makes a great point. Okay, Supreme Court, if you want this to be the case, then Trump needs to be held liable for the insurrection. It was his protest.
Definitely, without question, without question, and the evidence more than points to it. You know, Trump's involvement, Trump role as an orchestrator and as somebody who fanned the flames. But once again, in this law, we have two um, levels of justice: justice that applies to the settler colonialists and their descendants, and laws that apply to everybody else, particularly those of us whose ancestors were enslaved and used as currency in this country. It is all just a matter of, once again, paralyzing us into inaction and making sure that we don't go against the system, you know. And uh, whether Trump will see his day in court, I think it's getting closer. But you know, another thing that, and I really appreciate us, you know, making comparisons. Um, whether that's going to change the tide, you know, because we're dealing with a monster that lacks a moral conscience, you know, which is why we really have to continue protesting and doing other forms of protest that would change the tide. You know, protest is pretty much one of the only tools that we do have when the system does not work. That is exactly why they're using the law to take it away, which is why that should inspire us more now than ever to use protest and other forms of civil disobedience to take down the system.
Sam, you mentioned Trump being close to being held accountable. I guess we saw what's going. We see what's going on in New York with the prosecutors there. Several of them quit, and the ones that quit the office, the Manhattan District Attorney's office, said that there was more than enough evidence to show criminal. To prove a criminal case against Donald Trump and the financial side of things. But yet they have again stopped short of going all the way. The January 6th Commission continues. They've uncovered so many different facts. We talked about yesterday, just 3 weeks ago, Trump's folks, his former lawyer and other allies were still, as we speak, trying to decertify votes in Wisconsin to overturn the 2020 election. Do you think, do you believe, Sam, that Trump will be held accountable either civilly or criminally?
I think that remains to be seen. What's very interesting to me is that, you know, at the very same time that these legal proceedings are going on, Trump himself is in the shadows. To what degree he is debatable, but he's in the shadows, you know, pretty much splitting the Republican Party and doing what he's doing to, you know, I don't know if it's gonna mean he's gonna try to run in 2024, 2028. Oh goodness, 2024, you know.
That's okay.
Sorry, but you know, I'm not sure, you know, what that means, but what I do know is that Trump is fighting, you know, and he continues to fight. The likelihood of him getting brought to justice, I think he's getting closer, but I really cannot speak to that because I know what the law says, but I also know that those who are there to interpret the law are often doing so with their political bias in mind, or their need to tend to the needs of those who have power. So those things are often in conflict. But for right now, Trump is getting close to getting touched, but he's not all the way there yet, as far as I see.
Wow. Okay. We'll obviously we keep an eye on that, but we also, more importantly, keep an eye on the situation with DeRay McKesson. Sam, the State of Black America, the National Urban League released its annual report on the state of Black America, and its findings are grim. This year's Equality Index shows Black people still get only 73.9% of the American pie, while I'm sorry, that only get a small percentage of the 73.9% of the American pie that white people enjoy. While Black people have made economic and health gains, they've slipped farther behind whites in education, social justice, and civic engagement since the index was launched in 2005, according to the Urban League. A compendium of average outcomes by race In many aspects of life, it shows just how hard it is for people of color to overcome systemic racism. The Civil Rights Organization said, Mark Morial says, these numbers change so little and so slowly. What it tells me is that this institutional disparity based on race seems to be built into American society. The index shows not only that median household incomes for Black people at $43,862, that's 37% less than white people at 69,823. Black people are also less likely to benefit from home ownership, according to the index, the engine of generational wealth in America. Sam, it's the same old song, right?
Definitely, definitely. The home ownership piece is very important when you're talking about, the price of homes, and the price based on who's living in the home, the ethnic composition of the community, and just even the appraisal. When you're talking about that, when you're talking about loan, I mean, income to debt ratio. So even as Black people, we're more educated than ever before, but we're taking on massive amounts of debt, and we can't seem to pay it back, even with us, acquiring education and having really good careers and such. And you're also talking about in terms of breaking the ceiling. For a lot of us are the first in our family, the first to go to college, the first to have a corporate level job, so forth and so on. And with that comes oftentimes the burden of supporting other family members, or taking on things that don't allow us to build wealth. The name of the game here is collective action and wealth building for Black people. And what the report, in my opinion, from what I've seen, often I think that the report should lay the foundation in the conversation about what is exactly wealth building for Black people and what that means for Black people in this country. We should look at education differently. Are we having conversations with our young people about how to acquire scholarships at a young age? Are we creating 529 interest accruing savings at a young age for our children? Are we shifting our priorities in terms of what to buy and what not to buy? Are we collectively coming together in our communities to create economic systems that are more communal in nature? Because in the United States, as Black people, we have taken on individualistic economic philosophies instead of being more communal in a sense. We are making a small pie of the American dollar, but at the very same time, we can make that dollar work if we are investing it in better ways. And people, I know scholars who often shoot back against that and talk about the systems doing this and that, but at the very same time, it has been done before. It's about changing your philosophy around money, from what I've seen.
Yeah. You mentioned some great points. We often hear about a time, and it's a shame, Sam. But we're talking way back when the Black community really was a community.
Definitely, definitely. And community is about more than money. Money has spirit. So before you talk about spending money, you got to be in the right spiritual mindset, in the sense that you are building trust among one another. Do you trust your neighbor, your brother, your cousin, your mother, your father? And with that trust, are you able to go into business with them? Are you able to participate in economic systems where you're pooling resources? And as a matter of fact, once again, are we equipping our young people to take on careers, right? To take on careers where they can build infrastructures. I would love to hear more about young engineers, young carpenters, young electricians, people who are taking on different skill sets way beyond. And no offense to the 4-year degree, of course we need our liberal arts. I have a liberal arts degree. At the very same time, as you and I know, I also have a skill set, as do you, Stacy, that's very transferable. We need to start having discussions like this. Do we have skill sets that are transferable and can ensure that we can navigate any industry and can ensure that we can do for ourselves? And at the very same time, do we have the business acumen to create streams of income, right? that are, active and passive. These are conversations that we as families have to be having, because we have a smaller piece of the pie, but at the very same time, we are taking on titles and we are taking on other facets of the so-called American dream that are digging us further into debt.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts in the home, right? And that idea, and again, we talk about community. We know that old saying, "It takes a village," and really, that's something that has to be put into practice. And we're preaching to the choir with each other, I'm sure, on that.
We got a whole audience here. I would love, and I know the audience chimes in, and this will get played over and over again, but it's a message that needs to get played. And oftentimes, our organizations often do us a disservice by focusing more on the problem than building solutions, and I got a whole theory around why that's the case. But at the very same time, we need to start shifting paradigms in terms of how we interact with one another. My fiance and I often discuss this. I love hair care businesses, I love t-shirt businesses, but we need more diversity in the services that we're offering one another. We need to start nation building in the sense that, if we want to keep resources within the community, which is global now thanks to the internet, we need to start developing resources that tend to the needs of our people so that we can start spending money among ourselves and giving money to businesses that pour right back into the community. So it's a smaller piece of the pie, but at the very same time, it's a foundation. Even with the money that we're getting, it's small compared to here in the United States, but across the world, the US Black person compared to other Black people across the world is making more. So we got to look at it in that way. And we got to look at what we got and build the foundation for what we can have. And it's about thinking about what community is, what's good debt, if even there is such a thing, and how do we best build resources and prepare our children to take on industries and jobs that can help sustain us.
Well, Sam, we could talk about this all day. I love the insight. Uh, it's something that we're going to continue to watch. Again, the report from the National Urban League, the State of Black America. You can read about it in the Washington Informer this morning. A Texas student who thought she graduated number one in her high school senior class 4 years ago until officials realized they made an error in calculating the rankings and dropped her to the third spot is preparing to leave college with almost no loan debt. She walks away with a financial blessing thanks to a GoFundMe campaign that raised tens of thousands of dollars to replace the state benefit she lost by not being the valedictorian at her high school in suburban Dallas. Destiny Brannon raised $40,000 from her crowdfunding effort that she began in 2018 when she discovered she would have to pay for her tuition for her first year of tuition at the University of Texas at Austin. As a graduate of DeSoto High School, Brandon had been relying on a Texas state law that states if a student graduates with valedictorian honors from a high school accredited by the Texas Education Agency, their first year tuition at a public college or university would be waived. However, after the commencement ceremony where she received the valedictorian recognition and gave the class speech, the young scholar was informed that the district had miscalculated the class end of year transcripts and her actual position landed her in third place. Now, there was a lot of controversy with that, Sam. It was said that her speech, in which she really lit into her teachers, was what really made them change her grade and push her down to third place. And her family still believes that to be the case because she was a straight A+ student all the time.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And if you look at the timeline of the situation, after that speech, and the mother sort of referred to this, the rules around calculating GPAs for rankings in the class was changed because for as long as I can remember, you calculate the ranking in the first semester of the senior year. And then from there, that's where you go. They pushed it back to the spring semester. And that was a calculated effort on their part in response to what this young sister said on the podium. And, she got a hard lesson about, oftentimes what a lot of Black people, celebrities and not, often have to navigate. When you're given a platform, how do you use it? And at the very same time, what happens when you use it to bring truth to power? And, the outcome of all of that really speaks to what we were talking about earlier in terms of community coming around people, because when the state would not provide for this young sister, community came in and gave a whole lot of funds to her. So she is graduating from college debt free,
Yeah, that
free from
is
debt.
awesome.
Very awesome. Very
and,
awesome.
and and she said she was embarrassed because being a valedictorian, she got so much publicity. She says she was embarrassed only to be told that's a mistake. Um, it's the thing about it, Sam. Okay, let's just take their word for it for a moment. If that was the case, they miscalculated. She didn't miscalculate, so why punish her?
Well, that was the whole point to punish her, from what I can see. And it once again, it's a psychological game. She said it herself. They had put her on this pedestal. There was a lot of coverage about it. And then once that ranking fell, the whole point was to break her spirit and to boost their ego, because they thought that because she had been a valedictorian, she was going to make this speech pretty much, puffing them up and thanking them and being grateful for what she had. But in her leadership, right, she came out and she talked about what was lacking in the school. The whole point was not to embarrass the school, but to bring truth to power and to ensure that people behind her would get a much better situation than she did. Imagine had she gotten what was required of her, right? She would have probably had a much higher GPA than what she had as valedictorian, but they didn't see it that way. Oftentimes as Black people, once again, we are often called on to stroke the egos of people who, whose awards we have earned. They didn't give her that award. She earned that award, and in turn, she used her power to speak truth. And they try to punish her for that.
Yeah, she admonished the school that the teachers were subpar, and when you hear other students' stories from that school, they tend to agree with her. And as you said, Sam, as you eloquently stated, I mean, she was really looking out for those who were coming behind her. So, congratulations to this young, strong sister. As you noted, this is it's an uphill climb, Sam. It's an uphill climb.
Well, without a doubt, without a doubt. But if you got community behind you, then the sky's the limit. And I really see this young sister really doing her best, debt free, and going into the career of her choice, really, making strides in whatever she does. And I think that this is a perfect opportunity for any public school system to look at what they're doing and what they're not doing. Whether they are is yet to be seen, because education is a public good. Tax dollars go into it. So if somebody's criticizing it, they're criticizing it as a taxpayer. And it's up to you to make that change, without a
Yeah.
doubt.
And before we go off the air, I just want to let our viewers know about some of the remarks she made. She says this school year has been a troubling one for me and the DeSoto school system. We were challenged with subpar teachers who honestly weren't there to benefit the needs of the DeSoto students. Unfortunately, DeSoto is plagued with the idea that sports are somehow more important than education. I'm not quite sure how this ideology came about, but I do hope for a change. That was part of her speech that landed her in hot water with these school officials. Unbelievable. Look, she knew what she was speaking, right? And like you said, she spoke truth to power, and they punished her for it. But the good news, as Sam, again, you stated it well, this is where community comes in, right?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And one more point before we get off, I would love to learn about the ethnic composition of that school, where sports are held in greater priority than education. I think that would open up a lot of doors in terms of understanding why the culture is that way and why the state feels the need to prioritize one over the other. You know, congrats to the young sister for unearthing something that we should have already known about.
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle Madison says, kudos to her and having such courage. Thank you so much, Sam. As always, your insight. You talk about those philosophers or scholars that they put up on MSNBC and Fox and CNN. They got nothing on Sam Collins, in my opinion. Thanks so
Appreciate
much, Sam. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow for another edition of Let It Be Known.
Yes, sir.